morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro. And when you take care of your business, you get to kick back, you get to relax, you get to look at the rest of college football. Georgia certainly did that on Saturday, 34-3 at the hands of the Clemson Tigers. But there is still some very funny stuff coming out from Clemson after this game, and a lot of it coming from Dabo Swinney. We'll have some fun with that today. Florida State, my gosh, they were even worse last night than they were in the Week 0 opener against Georgia Tech there in Ireland. We will laugh at that on the program today. Billy Napier at Florida, I mean, it may be over before it even starts for him here in 2024. We've got some time to laugh at that today. Plus, in addition to all that, our good friend Connor Raleigh stops by. We'll have to get serious and get busy with some Georgia stuff here at a certain point. Some of that on the injury front from Georgia. Other key takeaways from Georgia from the win against Clemson. All of that is on the way. Dogs are on top, and everybody else is miserable, and their misery will be our entertainment. Does that sound good? I'm glad you're with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by ServPro. Cleaning, restoration, construction.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Have you ever said to somebody, or has someone ever said to you, this thing that sometimes we say when somebody you like does something funny, or, perhaps it's a comment you've made on social media about a famous person, something along the lines of, oh, never change. Hey, never change. In other words, when someone is doing something that you think is funny, you kind of throw that out there of like, I enjoy you so much, I never want you to change. Hey, never change, never change. I think the feeling behind that as a phrase, though, is it's obviously impossible because people eventually seem to change at least a little bit. I mean, that's kind of the thought here, is that we all get older, perhaps we get wiser. At some point in time, there's at least a little bit of change that occurs. But perhaps not always, because I think we have an example of, even though we would assume that everyone changes at least a little bit eventually, they observe the facts around them, they pay enough attention to their circumstances to alter their behavior or mindset perhaps a little bit. Maybe it is possible to go through life so completely delusional with blinders on that you just do not see the actual truth that exists around you. And maybe one of those people is Clemson coach Dabo Swinney. We have aftermath today of Georgia's 34-3 win against Clemson. Now, yesterday, we very briefly kind of took a little bit of a bow and accepted a little bit of flowers for the fact that, for the most part, we completely called the Georgia-Clemson game exactly as the result turned out to be. As I told you yesterday, that wasn't calculus, it wasn't algebra, it was just basic arithmetic. If you start counting the number of capable Georgia players, it is just a far greater number than what Clemson has. It is literally the greater than symbol, the one that sort of looks like an alligator. It is a greater than symbol pointing in the direction of Georgia. They just have more good players. And when a team has such a larger volume of quality talent compared to the opponent, well, in most cases, unless something really weird happens, in most cases, it is obvious that the team with the greater talent, especially when that's a large, significant number, it's obvious that team is likely coasting to an easy victory. So from our standpoint, it just wasn't that hard to assume that Georgia would beat up on Clemson. You can make football more complicated than it needs to be, or you can sort of see what's obviously true at the face value level. And this game for Georgia against Clemson was one of those that are sort of easy to see. But perhaps sometimes there's a way to get too close to the situation, and maybe you just can't see what's really going on, and maybe Dabo Swinney is one of those people. Are you ready to laugh here for a moment? If you're a Georgia fan, are you ready to get a good chuckle? Because Dabo Swinney on Sunday night does sort of a second press conference with some of the folks who cover Clemson, and when Dabo was questioned directly about the perceived talent gap around the two teams that play, Georgia and Clemson, well, Dabo Swinney apparently doesn't see that at all. I mean, can you believe this guy is so lost in his own imagination that he can't see what's so obviously true for so many of us? Let's get ready to laugh here as I read this quote to you. And this is coming from a website that covers Clemson. Headline says, Dabo Swinney liked how Clemson matched up with Georgia. Talent wasn't the issue. Let me read you a couple of sentences here. During Sunday evening Zoom conference call, Dabo Swinney addressed the talent gap question following Clemson's 34-3 loss to Georgia. Despite the lopsided result, Swinney expressed confidence that the Tigers, quote, matched up well with the top-ranked Bulldogs, highlighting it as a positive takeaway from the tough season opener. Here's the quote from Dabo. The scoreboard doesn't indicate that, Swinney acknowledged, but we've been a part of games where we've blown somebody out too. That doesn't mean they didn't have the talent. Sometimes it can get away from you, especially in season openers. So once again, Dabo sort of whining about having to play a tough season opener against a team like Georgia. We talked about that last week. So Dabo looks around and is like, hey, man, we're basically the same. You know, going back years ago, back when we did have elite talent, we used to blow people out too. Now, forget the fact we don't do that anymore and haven't done that in the last 3 or 4 years. But we used to do this, and so sometimes it just happens. Our talent, Georgia's talent, it's basically the same. We matched up well. There's no talent issue here. There's no talent gap here. I mean, can you believe that? What if you're a Clemson fan hearing that today? And I told you yesterday, we fixate too much on the idea that, oh, well, Dabo doesn't take transfers. Georgia took some transfers, and that's the difference. Y'all, it's everything. It's the fact that Kirby and Georgia are willing to go to the transfer portal, but it's also the fact they just have a much more insatiable appetite for recruiting than Dabo Swinney probably has ever had. I mean, you've got Deshaun Watson, you've got Trevor Lawrence. Well, okay, will some of the roster deficiencies get covered up when you have generational quarterback play? But when you're stuck with DJ Uiagalelei, more on him in a moment, and Cade Klubnik, all of a sudden the rest of your roster deficiencies have become a lot more to the forefront, and that's going on with Clemson here right now. And frankly, I do. I'm sorry. Maybe it's a sarcastic laugh, but it's a laugh nonetheless. I laugh in Dabo Swinney's face for thinking that his team is as talented as Georgia's is. And I laugh, to be honest, watching the Clemson fans probably shed some well-earned tears about this. If their coach is this lost, I don't know what to tell you. Because it only speaks to the growing chasm between a team like Georgia and these type of teams. Because to be frank, Georgia's not even willing to sit and rest on its overall talent advantage. You know, Dabo gets beat 34-3, and he's like, oh, we're fine. Yeah, we're good. Maybe we'll be the team that's winning 34-3 next time. We're basically fine. Nothing to see here. Nothing to worry about. We're not sweating this. We're just on to the next thing. And the ACC games will probably be easier than this. We'll have a chance to win some of those. Compare that to what exists at Georgia and realize that Georgia not only collects a talent advantage over teams like Clemson, which say what you want about them, they did come into the game ranked number 15 in the country. Georgia also pushes that talent to be far more successful than it otherwise might be. And I want to kind of park on that just for a moment because there was a very interesting moment yesterday in Kirby Smart's weekly press conference where he was asked a question about Arian Smith. He'd actually been asked a question about Arian Smith, and then a little bit later, he was asked a question about Arian Smith again. Now, the point here is not to talk too much about Arian Smith, although I'm sure we'll talk plenty about him over the course of the season. The point is this. As Kirby's talking about a guy like Smith, who when he came out of high school a few years ago was one of the top 10 receivers in the entire country, you know, kind of what it is that's allowed him to kind of have a role on this team and perhaps be in a position for even more success here in 2024. Kirby doesn't talk about the talent, even though we just kind of pointed out that based on recruiting rankings and acquisition of transfers, things like that, Georgia far more talented than a team like Clemson. What Kirby talks about here is how hard someone like Arian has to work just to find a role here on this team. And once again, we did this last week. You can look at sharp contrast between Kirby and Dabo, Georgia and Clemson, just based on just how much more of a competitive edge a program like Georgia seems to have. I mean, you got Dabo Swinney on Sunday night basically saying, yeah, we're fine. You know, we got beat 34-3, but our talent's just as good. And you've got Georgia saying, no matter how talented we are, talent alone is never going to be just good enough. In fact, here's Kirby Smart saying some of that kind of stuff about one of his very talented wide receivers, Arian Smith, from yesterday.
He's a product of a really tough physical program, and he'll tell you today he stands in front of the team and he is just a completely different person. He had never had to practice and strain like he does here, and he has made decisions that he wants to be really good, and so he works really hard at it. I mean, there's not a play that I can find where Arian doesn't run hard to the ball or try to block somebody and do something extra, and it's that way on special teams. He made a huge special teams play in the game and continues to improve by doing those things.
I love the word that Kirby Smart uses a pretty good bit, the idea of straining. Do you strain much in life? Now, I feel like sometimes I have to strain just to get out of bed. But in the normal course of your daily life, how often are you straining? See, this to me, and this is so important, this to me is the difference between the SEC and the ACC. You don't have to strain very much in the ACC because the teams in that league don't try very hard. They're just not that into football. They like taking the check from football, but they don't like contributing to the overall product, and that's why the ACC as a league might not exist anymore in the future. And a lot of us have sort of always known this to be true, but teams like Clemson, when they were using a weak ACC as a springboard of the college football playoff, they wanted to pretend it was otherwise not true. Last year you had Florida State, who was also using that same weak ACC to put itself in the position for the playoff. But once Florida State didn't make it, and once Clemson saw the financial deficit that was forming around them and competitors like the SEC, all of a sudden now they want to acknowledge what's obviously true is the SEC and the ACC are not the same kind of leagues. And the word like Kirby Smart that he uses right there, that a top 10, former elite 4-star style receiver like Arian Smith, just to make it at Georgia, you got to strain. Your talent alone is not going to be enough. You got to strain. I don't think Clemson is straining. I don't think Dabo Swinney makes his players strain. And it's that lack of full-on maximum effort, taking it to a level and finding a gear that you didn't know you had. That's the difference between Georgia and Clemson. That's why the final score is 34-3. And to be frank, speaking of the ACC, that's also why the Orange Bowl last year was 63-3, is that Georgia's actually done college football a huge favor over the course of the last however many months. It has totally exposed the ACC as a complete and total fraud of a league. Now, if you go back to last year's Orange Bowl, well, Florida State's got all kinds of excuses. Our quarterback got hurt, our players were sad, our whatever, blah, 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 blah. But the truth is they just weren't ready to compete. They weren't ready, to use Kirby Smart's word again, they weren't ready to strain. And what we said looking in on that game is that the fact that Florida State couldn't get back up to play, they couldn't get up to compete, making them a little bit like Clemson this past Saturday, sort of shows what they are and shows why they're not national champions, why they're not playoff level. They can kick around a bunch of ham and egg ACC foes and think they're good, but when they step outside the boundaries of the ACC, they find out for sure. In the same way that a coach like Dabo Swinney lives in a total world of delusion because of the tomato cans that he plays in a conference with, frankly, a program like Florida State's able to do some of that same kind of stuff. And let's go back to July for a moment. Remember ACC Media Days when Mike Norvell was kind of responding to something that Greg Sankey, I guess, had said at SEC Media Days? But when Norvell was talking about the Georgia Bulldogs during ACC Media Days, do you remember what he said back in July? Once again, sort of living in the delusion that somehow Florida State and Georgia are the same kind of team. Can I show you this quote on the screen here for a moment? This is from ACC Media Days, responding to the fact that Sankey had said that Georgia was one of college football's top 4 teams. Norvell said, I don't disagree that Georgia was one of the top 4 teams if you're judging off talent, there's that word again, and ability. But, Norvell says, they also earned their loss. That was part of the result of what happened on the field. When you look at our team and what it was, we controlled the things we could control. We unfortunately had an injury. We had a team that responded to it. Everybody can have an opinion of what happened. I don't disagree. Georgia was one of the 4 best teams, but what happened on the field kept them out of their playoff. See, this is the lie that a lot of us have been fed for a very long time, that somehow leagues like the SEC and the ACC are basically the same. And if a team like Florida State goes undefeated and a team like Georgia loses once by 3 points and the SEC championship Alabama, okay, well, I guess Florida State's better because they have a better record there at that point, as if the leagues were even close to the same. We told Mike Norvell that he was delusional. We told Mike Norvell that he was living in a dream world if he thought that Georgia and Florida State were a program standing equal stature, on the same equal plane with each other. And we also said that much like Clemson got exposed on Saturday, Florida State got exposed in that Orange Bowl loss this past year. Florida State fans weren't believing at the time, but are they believing it now? You would say that they probably are. In fact, I'm guessing we don't hear much from Florida State fans at all anytime in the near future because, as you know, last night, Florida State lost again, this time badly at home to Boston College. So all the big talk from a coach like Mike Norvell, much like some of the big talk you hear from Dabo Swinney, this idea that we're great because we're the best in the ACC, all of a sudden that has proven to be as fraudulent as it always was. So while you're in kind of a chuckling mood, laughing at Dabo Swinney, let's also laugh at Mike Norvell too, because last night, speaking in Tallahassee, after his team got embarrassed by Boston College, the bass that Norvell had in his voice back at ACC Media Days about, Georgia lost and we didn't, at least until we played Georgia. All of a sudden, that tough talk was completely gone. This is Norvell from last night.
I just sick to how the season started. Obviously tonight, I failed in preparing the team to be able to go out and respond tonight. And and just the things that were necessary for us, the things we talked about, things we emphasized, obviously, in all phases, we're not able to execute. I obviously didn't put them in a position to showcase what I believe that this football team is, and it's extremely disappointing. And I apologize to our fans, apologize to everybody associated with the program. I mean, that was extremely disappointing that we're not better.
If you listen closely, and maybe you have to be a media expert to pick this up, but if you listen closely, you can almost detect a slightly different tone of voice from Norvell after last night's Florida State loss than some of the confident talk of much of last year. If you really listen closely enough, you might be able to detect the difference. And obviously, I enjoy every second of this because, frankly, I'll be honest with you. And listen, I try to be a good-natured guy. I try to give people the benefit of the doubt. I try to do all those things. But the fact of the matter is I am sick and tired for the period of years being told, oh, yeah, SEC, ACC, it's all basically the same. They all deserve a spot in the playoff. The ACC champ does. The SEC champ does. We know how wrong that is. 34-3 on Saturday proves that. 63-3 in January proves that. The fact that Florida State's essentially been broken by Georgia since then, perhaps proves that too. So if you're a Georgia fan because you took care of your business, you do have a right. You have a right to laugh today. Laugh at Clemson, the excuses still coming out of that program. Laughing at Florida State as they fall apart and the excuses that have come out of that program ever since Georgia beat them as bad as they did. It certainly seems like Georgia exposed the ACC for a league that is what it is. And for that, the rest of college football perhaps owes the Dogs a debt of gratitude. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro. We are happy to have you, no matter how you get to us today, live on video across all platforms, 10 a.m., back on the radio today, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Rep, podcast wherever you find them, Apple, Spotify, everything else. Just so happy to have all of you with us, and so thankful to our friends at ServPro for making it all possible. ServPro also a part of our DawgNation Game Day coverage, too, providing you a chance to vote on who gets the game ball after every single game here this year. But when it comes to getting the game ball for serving you in life, our friends at ServPro are going to take care of you in one of your biggest times of need. Let's face it, if you're a homeowner, you look around your home, you want that home protected. But not everybody, certainly ever, can be protected from all kind of concerns. And every now and then, something may happen. You may have a water line break. You may have water just spewed all over your house. What the damage that can create. Or, and this is obviously a very serious situation, but, fires can occur. And when fire damage occurs in the home that you live in or the commercial property that you depend upon, well, you want that mess cleaned up. You want to put it back together like it never even happened. That's what the restoration specialists of ServPro want to do for you. They've dedicated their life to this. They've made a very successful business around this. Each of those franchises independently owned and operated. That means there's somebody out there that said, hey, for my business, for my livelihood, I want to take care of people and help them clean up really nasty, ugly messes. What a great thing that is to do for all of us. And that's what our folks at ServPro do. We call them restoration specialists for a reason. Find out for yourself if you are in need of their services online, servpro.com. SERV, servepro.com for a lot more on that. All right, on our program here today. Now, we just had some fun kind of laughing at Mike Norvell, laughing at Dabo Swinney. We may not be done today when it comes to mocking coaches who Georgia fans have had some fun with over the years. Y'all, somehow, some way, it's getting even worse for Billy Napier. Now, yesterday, we thought it was about as low as it could be with Napier trying to get the water bottle open and not being able to do that. We thought that was maybe about as bad as it gets. It perhaps gets even worse today. We'll tell you more about this here coming up in just a little bit. Also, Connor Riley stops by in a few minutes, too. What did we learn about Georgia in this game against Clemson on Saturday? Connor will tell us a lot about that here coming up in just a bit. Prior to that, though, I do want to go around the doghouse here today, presented by our friends at Georgia Safe Retirement Planners. I don't think that Dabo Swinney doing a very good job of preparing for the future there at Clemson, but you can do a much better job when it comes to preparing for your retirement future with our friends at Georgia Safe Retirement Planners. And so we'll do obviously a lot of this here around the doghouse, presented by Georgia Safe Retirement Planners here today. And this is where, at least for a moment, the music sort of shifts a bit. We got to get a little bit more serious here for a moment and obviously focus in on kind of what's next for Georgia on the injury front. Let's go through this. We saw Mikael Williams leave the game there on Saturday. That was certainly noticeable. Warren Brinson was obviously down for a while after, and you see the if you're watching on video, some of the stuff there from Mikael having to go down to a knee. We know that Brinson had been dealing with something for a while. Obviously that kind of, or at least an injury issue sort of bubbled back up for him again on Saturday. And then surprisingly, I think, at least, based on the chatter leading into the game, was Janelle Aguero's absence there as well. So yesterday, as you might would have expected, Kirby Smart gave a little bit of an update on kind of where Georgia stands on the injury front here. This is Kirby kind of updating all of those guys from yesterday.
Janelle was close to being able to play, worked out before the game. Thought he might be able to go in emergency. I don't really know today anymore. We just had a walkthrough. He walked through, and hoping he'll be able to go this week. Warren got a little bit of an ankle / contusion. Wasn't able to go. We're hopeful he's able to go. Mikael has an ankle sprain. It's a grade 2, but it's stable. He'll be week to week. Probably questionable this week, but not going to be a long-term ankle, and we'll see.
I'm reminded of back in 2022, Georgia beat Oregon 49-3, and then kind of went into a little bit of a shell after that. Not a very good performance against Kent State. I mean, I shouldn't say not very good. It just wasn't like 100-0 against Kent State. Seemed a little bit, whatever. Like Georgia played really, really well to begin the 2022 season, its last national championship. Dominant win against Oregon, dominant win against South Carolina, and kind of sort of managed its almost like the NBA idea of sort of load management for a couple of weeks after that, not playing great against much lesser opponents. I do think how Georgia manages its health is going to be really important here this year. And I think it probably goes without saying that for guys who are on the fence, we may see a lot of those guys not exactly playing this upcoming week, home opener against Tennessee Tech. I think, obviously, fans are generally speaking excited for a chance to see Georgia in Athens. We expect it to be the first time in a Georgia uniform for, say, Trevor Etienne. If Georgia builds a big enough lead, it may be a chance to evaluate what, say, Gunnar Stockton is at quarterback, after Stockton really got a lot of very positive reviews for his work this summer. So there's some stuff that, because of the opponent, you have a chance to see. But I think there's also some stuff because of the opponent, if things go the way they're supposed to, you have a pretty good chance of not seeing. And anybody who's sort of on the fence, probably not going to see. And a guy like Aguero, we think could be a very important part of the Georgia secondary here this year. But, I don't know what you see from him on Saturday. Obviously, we know how key the depth is going to be for the Georgia defensive line. When do you see all of those guys healthy and playing together? I mean, keep in mind this. We went a long time in 2022 without seeing Jalen Carter. For as impactful of a player as Carter was, we went a long stretch in that season without seeing him. That this really may be one of those situations this year for Georgia, like it's kind of done in the past. It's how healthy can you be at the exact right times? And if you're playing games in which you expect the result to be already predetermined, What do you do to manage yourself there so that you're healthier for later on? I think perhaps a more interesting question is, I mean, keep in mind this. So Georgia's got Tennessee Tech this week. It's at Kentucky the following week. Then it's an off week because of the weird, when there's 5 Saturdays in November, you have to create a little bit of an extra off week during the schedule. It's an off week there before going to Alabama September 28th. Well, we know road game at Alabama is all hands on deck. Anybody you can have ready for that game, obviously you want them to be. So what does Georgia do to make themselves as healthy as possible for the game against Alabama? If anybody's on the fence this week against Tennessee Tech, of course they're not playing. But road game at Kentucky, a place that Georgia has a history of playing games that sometimes are closer than the experts think, with Mark Stoops as the head coach on the other side. Road game at Kentucky. Is right now Kentucky good enough to force Georgia to push its issue on the injury front for that road game? Or can it be a little bit conservative who it chooses to play in that game there as well because of the perceived talent gap that would exist in that game? That's where things could get interesting. We'll be obviously watching that pretty close. We'll make that around the doghouse here today, presented by our friends at Georgia Safe Retirement Planners. So just like Kirby Smart's having to think about his future, making sure he's ready to go for first SEC road game, first really big game coming up against Alabama. Well, you've got benchmarks along the way you're trying to hit there as well when it comes to your financial goals and your desire to retire. But not just retire, to have the kind of dignified retirement that you deserve and have your dreams and your hopes met as much as you possibly can. And that's where our friends at Georgia Safe Retirement Planners come in all of this, because they want you to enjoy a comfortable retirement. And sometimes the comfort comes from the peace of mind that you get when you know that your money is safe, it's well taken care of, it's not unnecessarily risked. Well, that's what our friends at Georgia Safe Retirement Planners are all about when it comes to you. They're offering a truly free, no-obligation retirement planning service that includes no upfront risk to you. You get that peace of mind of knowing that your financial security is truly possible here in the future, and you may be able to generate more than 50% more retirement income at a fraction of the cost that you would have if you were working with somebody else. You don't have to worry about outliving your savings in retirement, and you have a chance to even forecast your future retirement income needs up to 20 years in the future because of how wise and how, I guess, seasoned and experienced our friends at Georgia Safe Retirement Planners are doing this kind of thing for people just like you. Been doing it for a long time. So if it's time for you to think about the next phase of your life and how you could be financially protected in that next phase, our friends at Georgia Safe Retirement Planners got you covered on all that. So find them online. It's GeorgiaSafeRetirementPlanners.com. That's GeorgiaSafeRetirementPlanners.com for a lot more on that today. All right, so I told you before we're done, way more drama coming out of Florida with Billy Napier, and I think it's really been kind of turned up here a little bit after yesterday. We'll tell you why. Strong reaction to all of this. But for now, how healthy is Georgia? Exactly when does Georgia need to be truly healthy moving forward? And what did we learn against Clemson? That and so much more as we talk to Connor Riley here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
A lot to talk about with Connor Riley here. Always happy to have him part of the program. Outstanding game day coverage from Mercedes-Benz Stadium there on Saturday. And for me, it's just really kind of fun to be back doing all that again. I just love sifting through all those stories at DawgNation.com and just, getting back into Kirby Smart press conference yesterday. Just feels really, really good to have the season here and upon us. Connor, let me stay on the injury front here for a moment before we do anything else. What was your reaction to Kirby Smart's overall evaluation? We just heard him on the subject of Janelle and Mikel and Warren Brinson. What was your overall reaction to what Kirby Smart was willing to reveal about the injury situation yesterday?
Yeah, I think it's all pretty standard stuff here from Kirby Smart. Look, he's not all that revealing when it comes to injuries, and I certainly understand why he wouldn't be. I'll be interested in seeing what kind of impact the SEC injury report has on both how forthcoming Kirby is at press conferences and just how accurate some of these injury reports are for Georgia when they start coming out. They don't start coming out until Georgia starts playing SEC games, which is next week against Kentucky there. So we're all going to have to wait and see here. I wouldn't play Mykel Williams this week. I don't expect them to try and play Mykel Williams this week. I think the far more likely thing is that he's probably going to dress and travel to that Kentucky game. Maybe they have a few package plays for him, but I think they're going to try and win that game without him. And you should be able to do that in hopes of getting him as close to 100% as he can be for that game against Alabama. I know you were talking about Janelle Aguero and the fact that it's Tennessee Tech this week. You may not see him because of the level of competition. But I actually think, like, if Janelle Aguero is close enough to being able to play, he really needs to push to get out there, because if Georgia's going to play more snaps with Malachi Starks at that star position and he's going to look like he did on Saturday, Janelle might want to get out there because there may not be a ton of snaps for him if Malachi keeps playing that well. I know Kirby had said that he wants to, have the guys that repped at that position play there, but for Malachi to come in and do what he did on Saturday, and that allows you to play KJ Bolden, who did look very good at safety there, alongside Dan Jackson, who I thought quietly had a very strong performance on Saturday. You wonder, maybe that is the best 5-man combination in the secondary there. So I think they're going to be maybe perhaps more eager to get Janelle out there than the level of competition would indicate. And then Warren Brinson, it sounds like he got stepped on. Sounds like it's just a bruise. We'll see if he's able to get out there and play. I would understand Georgia taking it cautious with him because they are so thin on the defensive line, and they know that they need to both, have him for bigger games later on down the line. But against the Tennessee Tech, this isn't a bad place to develop a guy like, say, a Jordan Thomas or Nasir Johnson, those freshmen that you bring in, Jamal Jarrett, and get them more snaps on the defensive line. That way that they can go about building better depth throughout the season there. So, we'll see what you see out of Warren Brinson and Mykel this weekend. But if I'm Janelle Aguero, I'm pushing as hard as I can to try and get out there and play and at least show the coaches what I can do at that star position.
And that's a situation where it's not so much comparing Janelle to Malachi at star. It's comparing Janelle at star to, as you said, either KJ Bolden or Dan Jackson at safety, because if the combination of Jackson with the experience and Bolden with the talent, if that's shining as brightly as it seems like it has a chance to at safety, well, at a certain point in time, do you worry about just sort of leaving well enough alone? Which is, if you're Janelle Aguero, and obviously we know that selfish ambition is, of course, going to be a little bit of that's going to creep in for every player. Your selfish ambition may sort of say, like, well, I'm not so sure I want to see too much of Bolden and Jackson looking that comfortable at safety. It's an interesting point to say, maybe I need to make sure I get myself back before Georgia decides it likes what it has with the safety combo here and moving Malachi to start. It's an interesting point.
Right. And, you look back last year, Tyke Smith led the team in interceptions. He led the team in tackles for loss. I think that star position naturally allows you to be a more impactful defender, especially when teams just are putting some of the better playmakers in the slot now moving forward. You certainly see that at the NFL level, and I think that's trickling down to the college level. So if you're Kirby Smart, why not put a guy like Malachi Starks at that star position where, yes, obviously it allows you to play Malachi back and have that last line of defense and limit explosive plays. But if you got Malachi around the ball more, like you saw on Saturday where he is able to make plays like he did, it at least gives you something to think about there. So I know there might be some trepidation with Janelle coming off of a pulled muscle. We don't know what the muscle is. Hopefully Kirby tells us that tonight. I'm not optimistic he will, given he's had 3 or 4 chances to speak on it and has not yet. But I think if you're Janelle Aguero, you're pushing very, very hard to get out there and play and show why, prior to that injury, that he was going to start for Georgia at that star position.
So let me ask you one more thing about the injury front, then I want to move on and talk about something different. Here's what's really interesting is that, look, in 2022, when Georgia won its last national championship, how it managed health over the course of the season, I do think was a factor in that. You rotated offensive linemen so guys were ready when you needed them. You held out Jalen Carter for kind of a long time that year, and he obviously eventually kind of exploded on the scene late in the year once Georgia needed him. I hate to use this phrase, but, quietly, Georgia sort of load managed in 2022, I think, if we're being honest. Does Georgia need all hands on deck for a road game at Kentucky? And obviously Kirby Smart would never say this, but we're not Kirby Smart. Is Georgia going to load manage against Kentucky on the road 2 weeks from now?
I'm interested in seeing how Kentucky looks against South Carolina this weekend, because their game on Saturday against Southern Miss, very up and down. The weather obviously impacted it. They called it early in the second half, so it's hard to really glean anything from that Kentucky team and what they showed. In the past, Georgia hasn't always necessarily played great at Kentucky. I know they've never lost since Kirby Smart took over going against Mark Stoops. But more often than not, Kentucky has found a way to play Georgia tough. So the fact that that's going to be there, the fact that it's a night game, Stanford Steve on the SV pod this weekend said that there's a chance game day might be going to Lexington for that week. So I'll be interested in seeing how Kentucky looks this weekend. And if they go out there and beat a South Carolina team that looked pretty horrible in that first week against Old Dominion, I do think that that's a game where Georgia's probably going to have to be more buttoned up. And that's before even getting into the fact that it's a revenge game of sorts for Jamon Dumas-Johnson and Brock Vandagriff, two players who are going to be very important for this Kentucky team who transferred away from Georgia this offseason.
Yeah, moving on to the Clemson game in total here. What were your kind of key takeaways from that game? I mean, obviously it was a slow start that turned into a dominant Georgia victory. The third quarter was really, I think, from a Georgia fan's perspective, a thing of beauty. But if you kind of try to sum this up, Chat GPT style, like what was sort of like the key summary for what the Clemson win meant for Georgia?
First of all, we don't use Chat GPT in this household. We try and keep AI at an arm's distance. I've seen all the Terminator movies. I don't want anything to do with that kind of stuff. Look, I thought that third quarter, it was as impressive as they've played and as impressive as they could have played and going out there. Obviously, you want to see the offense start a little bit faster there. I don't think they ran the ball particularly well, and I think that really gummed up what they were trying to do in the first half there. But when you insert Nate Frazier, you have a little bit more juice. You find a little bit more of explosiveness. I think that sort of opened everything up over the course of the second half there. But defensively, it was just very evident about midway through that second quarter, Clemson is just not going to be able to do anything against this Georgia defense. And so when you have a defense like that certainly, I think that was a better performance than anything that Georgia showed in 2023 and is up there, 2022 as well. It was, and I wrote this, a performance that was on par with what we saw in 2021 in terms of impactfulness, in terms of really just, I think, turning the water off on a Clemson team that, could very well still win the ACC this year. We'll see. With Miami, that Florida program is in a world of hurt right now. I think Billy Napier might want to start taking some Ozempic to distract people from everything else that is going on and say wow, Billy Napier is losing a ton of weight. This is great for him with all the stress he's got. And so it's still a quality Clemson team in my mind, but Georgia just showed that, and they showed this last year too, that their best is better than anyone else's best in the country. Now, can Georgia get there all that often? That's going to be the question to see. We're certainly, I don't think, going to find that out this weekend against Tennessee Tech. But that third quarter in particular, and the first drive of the fourth quarter as well, showed what this Georgia team can look like at its best. You saw that against Oregon in 2022 as well, and what that gear looks like. How often can Georgia get to that place? Because you can't operate at peak efficiency all the time. And so finding out what sort of that level medium is for Georgia, I think is something I'm still interested in seeing, because I think it was not quite, it's better than it was in the first half, certainly offensively, but I don't believe that you're going to be able to play as well as you did for that third and fourth quarter on a week in, week out basis.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it kind of comes down to two things, and what you just said sort of springboards both these thoughts for me. Looking at the defense, it's an overwhelming positive. It's the old great Irk Russell line of, if we score, we might win, but if they don't score, we can't lose. It is such a value. I mean, this is obviously an elementary point, but the idea that you're not going to give up a touchdown is such a valuable commodity. I mean, last year, we only saw Georgia do that against obviously overmatched opponents like Ball State and Florida State. Back in 2021, Georgia did that 4 times. To think that, about halfway through this game, you came to the conclusion of, I don't think Clemson can score a touchdown. Do you know how much easier a game is to win when your opponent can't score a touchdown? And I don't believe that this Georgia defense is 2021, but it's also not 2023 either. And I think that might be a really good thing for UGA. So let me kind of pause on that. I mentioned the other thing I was going to say is, on the basis of one game, I do think this is an upgraded Georgia defense from what it was last season.
I watch the second level, watch what they do with those linebackers, with safeties coming down. It's not lost on me that KJ Bolden had the first tackle of the season for Georgia, and he just comes screaming down and nails Phil Maffa and ends a third down there. They have so much speed at that second level that it's just going to make things really, really hard to play horizontally against these teams. And that's what a lot of college football teams like to do. They like to try and take advantage of the extra space because of the hash marks at this level. But it's really hard to win that way. So if you're going to beat this Georgia team, or at least try and make this Georgia defense sweat, you're going to have to try and play vertically. And look, people can say what they want about Dalen Everett. He was in perfect position on 2 of those deep passes that just happened to get caught because there were great individual efforts by Cade Klubnik on the first one and Jake Brenningstool on the second. Like, I don't know what more he could have done there. And you're going to have to do that 7, 8, 9 times a game if you're going to be able to move the ball consistently and get enough scoring reps for your team to have a chance to win that game. And so, yes, there are concerns about the defensive line, and we'll see how they continue to develop there. But with what they have at inside linebacker, with what they have in the middle of that secondary, they're going to be able to close off the middle of the field and just make things very, very difficult for opposing offenses.
Now, the other thing is, and we'll be, about halfway through the second show of the week, I haven't said this yet this week, but if I'm being completely honest, I do have to admit this, is I do think there's a large portion of what happened on Saturday that was somewhat opponent dictated. I don't think Clemson's very good. I don't think that Clemson's going to shake off this Georgia game and march right through the ACC and sort of look like a typical Clemson team when it's playing a lesser level of competition. I think they have some good things and some bad things, and so therefore some weeks they'll play well, some weeks they won't. I think there'll be a little bit of a mixed bag here this season, but I do think it would be a huge mistake, and I'm just being honest. I think it'd be a huge mistake for Georgia fans to assume that because you beat Clemson 34-3, any of your other marquee SEC games have gotten any easier. Because honestly, I think Bama, Texas, and maybe even Ole Miss would have also dominated Clemson on Saturday. I just don't think this Clemson team is very good. So from a Georgia standpoint, I think that you would certainly put yourself in harm's way if you took a quarter off offensively against one of these SEC opponents you have coming up, and I'll include Tennessee in that category come November. That it's great that Georgia exploded offensively in the third quarter like it did, but you can't get off to that slow of a start. And I don't know how you diagnose it. I mean, a lot of fans are going to point the finger at Mike Bobo. I don't know that Carson Beck played his best in the first quarter of this game, perhaps either a little too hurried at times or maybe a little too willing to kind of settle for something as opposed to trying for something a little bit better. But whatever it is, Georgia essentially only played offense for 3 quarters in this game, and that's not going to be good enough against the better teams that you play, and I just think it has to be said at some point.
No, and Carson told the broadcast, he was maybe a little bit too juiced to start the game, and that's something that happened to him last year. And he's always been someone that I think gets better as the game goes along. You think back to the Auburn game last year, even the Alabama game as well, how much better he was playing in the fourth quarter than the first quarter. And most of the time it's what you want to see out of your offense and your quarterback there. But to your larger point, and I could not agree more with Clemson, I am so out on making any grand sweeping generalizations in a positive way coming out of week 1. I already hate and loathe that people are talking about Miami, USC, Notre Dame as like playoff locks or playoff teams. Like, we need to get so far past that. And the people that push that kind of narrative, I think are actively harming the sport. But you can certainly hurt yourself in week 1 or in your first game of the season. I think you saw Florida State do that both times technically now with 2 losses before week 2 officially gets underway. Florida really taking themselves out and no showing against a Miami program. And then Clemson showing that they're just so clearly not the same caliber of program that they used to be. So I think there's a good chance by the end of the season, like Clemson might be like the 7th or 8th best team that Georgia plays this season. And so, again, to your larger point, I agree with. This is a Georgia team and a Georgia program that is going to play better opponents, and they're going to have to play better for stretches against those teams. But when they absolutely needed to kick it into gear, they were able to do that against Clemson. And if you're able to do that, say, against Clemson, that gives you at least some belief that you might be able to do it against Alabama. You might be able to do it against Ole Miss and Texas, because there is still good talent in parts of that Clemson team. I think there's a good chance that that's the best defensive line that Georgia plays this season. And so if you're able to get things rolling like they were in the second half, I think that's an encouraging sign moving forward for what this Georgia offense can be. But there are some things to fix there as well.
Now, let me spin this into a positive here real quick, in that as Georgia emerged offensively, one of the reasons why it did was because the playing personalities emerged. Colby Young is the red zone threat we thought he could be. London Humphreys is that sort of shifty, go get the football, make a guy miss with lateral quickness. He was that on Saturday. obviously you're going to bring Nate Frazier into this. He is what, he's supposed to be and what the rumor mill said that he was. So I do think that you saw the building blocks for a lot of potential with this Georgia offense. But, boy, when you play in Tuscaloosa at the end of this month, you can't get off to that slow of a start offensively. You just can't.
Right. And I think if you want to take the glass half full approach of this Georgia offense coming out of this game, the Georgia offense, in terms of the playmakers they have, it's kind of like a charcuterie board. You've got your prosciutto, you've got your cheese, you've got your pickles, you've got your premium crackers, you've got everything that you want in terms of being able to win in a variety of ways. You've got the deep threat, Arian Smith. You've got, Nate Frazier bringing some explosiveness out of the running back field. We'll see what we ultimately see out of Trevor Etienne eventually, whenever that might be, because Lord knows we're not getting an answer from Kirby Smart on that. So they've got a variety of ways that you can win, and you even learn some new things about some new guys. Obviously, London Humphreys coming up with 2 big third down catches. Lawson Lucky having a 31-yard reception there on Saturday as well. There's a lot of different things that this Georgia offense can do, and it's not predicated on being successful in one thing. They have the ability to do a lot of different things well because of the variety of playmakers that they have. And if they're able to get those guys and keep those guys healthy, I do think that that's going to make life so much easier for Carson Beck, because on a week-by-week basis, depending on how the matchup is and where the other team struggles, they're going to be able to go and pick on certain matchups and advantages because of the variety of skill sets that they possess.
All right, to finish up, you said a moment ago you don't like, overreactions to week 1, so let's do some overreactions to week 1 here for a moment. But in all seriousness, I think it's easier to have negative takes that prove to be true than it is to have positive takes after week 1 that prove to be true. Was there anything that you saw kind of outside of Georgia on the first week of the season that you think you'd be willing to stand by for the rest of the fall?
I think LSU is going to be okay. Now, as the only person on our Go With The Flow show on Friday that said not only was USC going to cover the 4.5 point spread, but win outright, which they did.
Good call.
I liked what I saw out of both those programs. I think both those teams have a lot of talent. There's some things that they got to fix. I understand Brian Kelly wanting to be angry and giving his best Jonah Jameson impression after the game, but there's still a lot to like about that LSU team. I think Garrett Nussmeier, and look, you're the driver of the Garrett Nussmeier hype train. That guy can spin it, and he's going to win a lot of games, I think, for LSU this year. The thing that's most concerning to me, and I 100% agree with you, it's hard to take positives out of week 1, but I can darn sure take some negatives. I don't know how Florida no-showed in the manner in which they did. That's a game you have to come out and be competitive in. And for it to be 38-10 at the end of the third quarter against a Miami program who you're in a similar boat with, that's the last thing that you needed to see from Billy Napier. And I know you're going to get into it here shortly. How Billy Napier doesn't understand that they don't have basements in Central Florida is just another red flag for him and his program. And for a Florida program that needed to start off on the right foot, what happened on Saturday was an absolute worst case scenario. And you can try and put this on Billy Napier, and sure, he's made some missteps and made some mistakes, but you can't keep doing what Florida is about to do, where you continue to struggle and blame the coach once again. Florida very clearly needs to have a long, hard look in the mirror and say, look, we can't keep cycling through coaches, because this is about to be our 6th one since 2010 if we move on from Napier, which I am almost certain that they are going to do after what we saw against Miami this weekend.
Yeah, the one thing that Florida hasn't done yet, though, is spend big on the proven coach. The same thing that, Scott Woodward, the LSU athletic director, is sort of famous for doing. When you hire a coach, you hire the biggest name that you can afford. That's the one thing that Florida really hasn't done. And I'm sorry, Dan Mullen was not that. Mullen was not a huge winner at Mississippi State. He was just better than that program had. Napier was Group of 5. It was easy to sort of question, are you sure you want to take a bet on a guy that hasn't really succeeded? Obviously, Jim McElwain was Group of 5 before that, too. That what you see from Florida is they've taken somewhat risky bets on their coaching hires, and it's possible that you lose them all. And right now, that's what Florida's doing, compiling one unsuccessful coach after another. I personally love to see it, but it's sort of obvious here that a program in Florida that's notorious for going on the cheap. Gators do not spend big. They never really had. Trying to go a little cheaper with a head coaching hire, I think, has failed them now for a decade. That's how long it's been since they've been a relevant factor in college football, right?
Right. 15 years. And so I think if you're Florida and what you want to do going forward, because people are already kicking around, like, who are the names that you're going to go after? Like, Florida in the last 15 years as a program is not a better program than Oregon is. I'm not sure why Dan Lanning would leave unless he just believes that he can recruit better and there's easier access to talent, and thus there's an easier potential path to a national championship at Florida than Oregon. I don't believe that exists, but maybe Dan Lanning does. You know, a guy that'd be interesting to me, I know it's only one game. Bill O'Brien's a really good coach, and they put a number on Florida State last night. And look, I know Alabama fans don't love him. Go look at what Bryce Young has done at the NFL level so far in his career compared to what he was doing with Bill O'Brien at Alabama, and what Bill O'Brien's offense did against Kirby Smart's defense in the 2021 SEC championship game when they did have a full complement of Jamison Williams and John Mechie, not to rehash that there. I think you're right that they need to go spend big and go get a proven winner. But I mean, BA, you're as questionable on Lane Kiffin as anyone out there. Does Lane Kiffin fit those parameters for you? Because as someone who's even probably higher on Lane Kiffin than you are, I'm not totally sure that he does.
Yeah, I'd love Lane Kiffin at Florida. I'd go buy some coastal property if Lane Kiffin was at Florida, because the Gatorator up there is not going out of style anytime soon if Lane Kiffin is at Florida. This is Kiffin's year to prove that he's a serious person. And beating Furman by 70 whatever points is not going to necessarily prove that for me. Obviously last year Kiffin got some wins, but no real big win. This is the year that Kiffin needs to get a big win against somebody at some point in time. And absent that, Florida would be foolish to hire him.
Right. And so, is it Alex Golch at South Florida, who I like as a coach? They play Alabama this week. If you watch or go with the Flow Show, you might see South Florida showing up despite a large number on some best bets.
Wow.
I think, Florida, and it's sort of where the coaching thing is at this point in time. Like, who are you going to spend big to go get? Because for 15 years now, going on 15 years now, Florida has shown as an institutional level that they're just maybe not buttoned up enough to be a national championship team on a week in, week out basis. And, for as much uncertainty as there is with Billy Napier right now, Florida also has an interim president, and Scott Strickland has made multiple head coaching hiring and firings that haven't exactly worked out there. So you have to wonder what the stability is moving forward with Florida, and who's even going to be allowed to make the decision to either remove Napier or hire another coach. It's very, very concerning times for Florida. And as much as things have been up and down in recent years, coming out of this week one, it's about as dark as things could be going forward there for this Florida program.
100% agree on all fronts, and I love every minute of it. Connor, great to have you here as part of DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro today. Look forward to reading plenty of you at DawgNation.com. Obviously, more coming out of Georgia over the course of the next couple of days as well, and we will see you back here again. DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro, again very soon, too.
And as always, it was a pleasure.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
We'll do more of the Florida stuff here in a moment, including what I thought was a reprehensible comment from Billy Napier yesterday, which we'll get to here in a bit. Connor said that, he doesn't like takeaways from week one, saying, well, so-and-so is going to be good. One of the teams that he mentioned was Notre Dame. Now, let me tell you this just real quick. If you told me I had to hitch my wagon to a team outside the SEC for the rest of the season based on what we saw from them through 1 week, Notre Dame would be that team for me. We talked about the Irish the other day in terms of their overall statistical profile, a little bit better maybe a year ago than you realize. Going on the road as a small underdog and winning at Texas A&M, even though Kyle Field has been one of the easiest places for road teams to thrive despite reputation in the SEC the last few years. That to me is a fairly significant accomplishment. They're an overwhelming favorite to make the playoff. I think they're probably pretty good. And what's funny is that, Brian Kelly leaves Notre Dame to go to LSU because obviously his belief that Notre Dame was never going to truly compete for a national championship. I don't believe they're truly competing for a national championship either. But I do believe there's a far greater chance that Notre Dame plays its last game after LSU plays its last game. Interesting to think that Kelly leaves Notre Dame in the hopes of finding greener pastures. But in all honesty, the post-Notre Dame world for Marcus Freeman's actually probably been better than the outlook was when Brian Kelly was head coach. All the more reason why I think you're right to have some skepticism for Kelly here right now. All right, cruise around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And obviously, we love Utopia of the Seas. We love the fun that you can have on board that great ship as we head towards April. But as I've been telling you, y'all, you don't have to wait until April to be on board this gorgeous brand new cruise ship from Royal Caribbean. On Saturday at our DawgNation Invasion tailgate, had so much fun telling people all about it, why we think it's better. And, it's some of the stuff that's happening right there on the pool deck that I think sort of explains this. Like, one of the things that Royal Caribbean does a really good job of is you do research, you kind of find out what passengers enjoy. And obviously, people love the pool decks. And that's why on Royal Caribbean, on Utopia of the Seas, you've got water slides that are bigger and better than any of the water slides that Royal Caribbean's ever had before on its ships. You've got the double level now for the lime and coconut, the terrific bar. You get the view bar that kind of looks out over the ocean. So many great ways to make the experience better, because if you go on a Royal Caribbean cruise ship like Utopia of the Seas, that's what you want. You want fun in the sun. That's what Royal Caribbean's got for you. So please give Jessica Slater a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com, and she can get you everything that you need as far as your next great Royal Caribbean cruise vacation is concerned. She can tell you all about all of that. All right, now, for us, a couple of things here as we're cruising around the SEC. Let me start with this. So things have gone from bad, I would say, to worse for Billy Napier. His demeanor lets you know what he thinks his future is, because yesterday, kind of given a chance to respond to some criticism, things like that, instead of just sort of taking it in stride and sort of keeping the sort of stoic demeanor that a well-paid coach is supposed to have, I thought that Billy Napier took a shot at his own fans. Now, listen, we don't like Florida fans around here, but in a roundabout way, and you're not going to like this, but in a roundabout way, I sort of find myself wanting to come to their defense here a little bit, because honestly, they probably see their favorite team a little bit like we'd see our favorite team if our favorite team kind of had fallen in hard times. Like, the last thing you want is to be talked down to by your coach and made to feel less than as a person. I thought this was a horrible, horrible, reaction to Billy Napier for what is obviously a frustrating time. Connor Riley referenced it before. Let me let you hear it for yourself here. Billy Napier kind of getting the knives out a bit for what he thinks are fans who are coming after him. Let me let you hear Billy Napier.
We got to go to work on the football part, and I think we got to become a more consistent team, and we have to execute better. And if we can focus on those things and not necessarily what some guy in his basement saying in rural Central Florida on social media, then we got a chance to get better, right? So
a couple of things here, and I'm probably going to take this more seriously than it deserves to be. Honestly, this crawled all over me yesterday. First of all, as Connor points out, Billy Napier clearly showing not much knowledge of like home construction and topography when it comes to Central Florida. There are no basements in Central Florida for the most part. It's very flat ground. You don't have the sloped lots that make basements possible. Maybe you didn't know that, but if you live in Florida, you probably should. Napier lives in that area. Perhaps you could just look around and notice what's around you there on that. People don't have basements in Central Florida. But obviously what Napier is trying to do here is call on the sort of old school cliche jab that people use when they get criticism on the internet. It's like, so-and-so in their mom's basement, right? The basement is always the place where the trolls live. Even though people don't have basements in Central Florida, the basement's always the place where the trolls live. So when Napier wants to take a jab at those who are criticizing him, he goes to the cliched basement line, which is kind of tired and sort of, as I said, cliched, but maybe to be expected. But the thing that bothers me is, why do they have to be rural? These rural people in Central Florida. Like, all of a sudden, because you make millions of dollars, you don't have to concern yourself with the opinions of rural people anymore? Like, I just find that to be gross. And the truth is like, the Napier family has been beloved in Georgia for a long time, going back to some great high school coaching done in rural Georgia. And all of a sudden, the rural people are the problem now for Billy Napier? I'm sorry, I hate that. I absolutely do. And listen, when it comes to coaches, like, my opinion is probably a little bit different than some media types are. Like, if Deion Sanders doesn't want to take so-and-so reporter's question in Boulder, Colorado, regardless of the First Amendment and freedom of the press and stuff like that, the honest truth is I just don't really care. And maybe I should. I'm not saying what's right and wrong. I am saying personally, I just don't really care all that much. That's somebody else's business. That's not my deal. Or if like Kirby Smart doesn't want to open up practice and doesn't want to show, all of that kind of stuff. Some programs do have more practice availability for media. Some coaches don't. Kirby Smart doesn't really. It'd be cool to see more practice, but ultimately, I don't really care. I would say as a coach, you kind of have, in my eyes anyway, a good bit of freedom to do whatever you want to do for the most part. I'm just sort of okay with most of that. Maybe I shouldn't be that way. Maybe there's a level of sophistication far above my head where you kind of know right from wrong and you'll talk about, how wrong all that is. What I'm saying is you're going to have a hard time getting me to care. I just don't. But here's the one thing I do care about. You are not, as a coach, going to tell me what I can say about you, okay? You can restrict practice. You can restrict your press conference. You may have you may at least have the authority to do that, whether you have the right to do it or not. You may at least have the authority to do it. But you don't have the authority to tell rural people what they think about you. And if you lose, they're going to say what they think because they don't have to worry about what you think about them. See, the people closest to you, whether it be the people that work in your building or the people that cover your program, they at least have to care about your feelings enough to tiptoe around you just a little bit, but the rural guy living in Ocala doesn't. If you lose, he's going to call you out on it. And if you hate him because of where he lives, then it makes you, I don't know what, but somebody that I don't like very much. And so I can't stand this kind of stuff. It's like, as a coach, you make millions. And by the way, if Kirby Smart ever said the same thing, I'd be mad at him about this too. I really would be. I can't stand stuff like this. You have the power to do a lot, and you can bathe yourself in money. But you can't tell some rural guy in Ocala what to say about you. He's going to say what he wants to, and you're going to stand there and take it. And if you can't, then get off the stage because you don't belong there anyway. That burns me up. And I love all the stuff about, Gator hater and all that kind of funny stuff. I love the, Billy Napier water bottle thing. I love laughing about that. But I don't like mocking fans because of where they live. Oh, you're rural, so somehow your opinion doesn't matter. That drives me insane. Now, on a much, much different note, as you turn ahead to week 2, probably not as deep of a schedule for big games around college football, but perhaps some games of interest across the sport here right now. Let me give you a couple of things to watch for as we head towards week 2. How about Texas on the road at Michigan? How fascinating is this going to be? Much the same way that a team like Florida State, through 2 losses, has been exposed, I think we may be close to seeing some of that same kind of thing from Michigan, too. We said to begin the season, if there are top 10 teams that don't belong there, if there are top 10 teams that will finish the season unranked, we correctly recognize Florida State as one of those. We would say Michigan is the other. Did not think Michigan looked very good this past Saturday. They've got key issues at quarterback. I think they could really be in trouble against Texas on Saturday. We shall see about that. I think that Tennessee and NC State's a pretty fascinating game. This is not a wild point spread in favor of Tennessee. In fact, the Vols, at last check, were kind of inside of a touchdown in this game, or right at a touchdown, a little bit inside of a touchdown there on Saturday. So clearly there's some confidence in the Wolfpack coming from somewhere, but it could be a day for Tennessee to show something about themselves. And with an LSU team not being as good, maybe at least through week 1 as we thought, A&M having some struggles there too, that could be to some SEC teams' benefit. And right now, maybe one of those teams looking to move up the pecking order might be Tennessee, but a game against NC State becomes a little bit of a proving ground for that after a pretty record-setting day, at least an eye-popping stat line from Nico Iamaleava in his first full season that started going back to Saturday. I think Arkansas-Oklahoma State could be interesting. Obviously, Arkansas needs every win it could get. Oklahoma State has aspirations for winning the Big 12. I think South Carolina-Kentucky's a really fun game. That's Georgia's next opponent. South Carolina struggled mightily against Old Dominion. Do they have any rise up in them whatsoever? I think that could be pretty interesting to see, too. And for an Auburn team, doesn't have a whole lot going for them right now. They do get Cal on Saturday there as well. So interesting stuff as it relates to all that. We'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, let me give you one more shout out here before we wrap things up here today. I believe today is the day that we're notifying the winner of our Sip and Swing contest, courtesy of our friends at the Finish Long Drinks. Let me give a big thanks to the Finish Long Drink, who loves having fun with Dog Nation, loves doing big events. We're going to get a chance to play some golf together, at least the winter coming up in September. So for everybody who's participated in that, I appreciate that. For all of you who are enjoying the Finish Long Drink on a regular basis, I appreciate that there as well. If you use the hashtag Sip and Swing, you could be hearing back from Dog Nation here today, and you could be a winner joining us for a really fun golf outing coming up later on this month. So stay close to your device, phone, email, whatever else. Somebody could be notified a little bit later on, and you could be a winner there on that. So thanks to the folks at the Finish Long Drink who made the Sip and Swing contest possible. And for all of you who use the hashtag on X and Instagram, we appreciate your participation. And for all of you who are enjoying the Finish Long Drink on a regular basis, we appreciate that too. All right, so to wrap up here today with some fun golden shoes. You know, yesterday we talked about Danny Cannell, notorious SEC troll. Cannell, you can imagine, probably not quite tweeting with the same veracity last night as he was after some SEC losses there in week one. Let me show you our first golden shoe. Hoof-Hearted shared this with me. Cannell, now listen, I've been there before where, you know, at one point in time, Cannell last night was like, I think Florida State's going to settle down and find a way to win this game. A little bit later on, I think FSU might lose. There's always that moment when you eventually wave the white flag. Poor old Danny had to wave that last night, so I've told you before, I'm kind of entertained by Danny Cannell a little bit, though. I don't mind the pro wrestling stick from him. Next golden shoe there as well. So I was actually searching. I saw this on X. A guy named Jaybird shared this from our video of KJ Bolden after committing to Georgia. Jaybird saying, this is what KJ looks like looking at CJ Wiley right now. Obviously, CJ Wiley, who also committed to Florida State, much like Bolden once did. So obviously some Georgia fans having some fun with the idea that maybe Wiley eventually flips like KJ Bolden did a year ago. We know that Wiley, the four-star receiver, was at the game last night. War Chant published photos of that. Burt Bradford reached out to me to say, I'd like to officially start the rumor that C.J. Wiley is going to be out on FSU, maybe coming to UGA. Admittedly, we will be watching C.J. Wiley closely on all of that after clearly a very bad night for his Seminoles. Pretty funny to see all of that. And finally, we'll give you this. Our buddy Robin Barkalot, who says, I forgot to send this to you, but the excitement of Georgia and its win against Clemson, a really well-done graphic by him of a very ferocious-looking dog stomping all over that tiger skin rug right there. Our buddy Barkalot gives a lot of great golden shoe submissions. This is certainly a good one. We'll give him a golden shoe for that there as well. Lousy, stinking Gators. Long time since they've beaten the Georgia Bulldogs. You better believe the rural folks in Central Florida have recognized that. 1,396 days. That's how long it's been. It's going to keep on climbing, and Billy Napier can't do anything about it. That's our Gatorade Updater. We'll see all of you back here tomorrow. Dog Nation Daily, presented by ServPro. And on video time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. We're going to be quick with comments today. Total confession. Looking forward to a great lunch with our buddy Dari Payro here coming up in just a little bit. So we're going to do that. That's going to be fun. But we will take a couple of comments here for you just for a little bit. On Facebook, Alan Verbanchik kind of reminding us that it was not a good night nor a good start to the season for Marvin Jones Jr. Now, listen, I don't revel in that, but if we're just being completely honest, in a transfer portal age where everybody is negative recruiting all the time and decisions can – and there's probably more negative recruiting than there used to be because there are more kids capable of making a decision. While I would – I mean, you'll – like I just kind of mocked Billy Napier. You'll never hear us mock a player. We've never – I don't think we've ever have. You are well within your rights to point this out. Hey, this guy left us. He went there, got a big promise, maybe got some money, but he's probably not happy today. In a transfer portal age in which all of this stuff is so cutthroat and aggressive, pointing out somebody made a bad consumer decision, I think you're well within your rights to do that. I really do. Ulysses Dunning's pointing out that Georgia has a chance to win its 41st game in a row in the regular season coming up on Saturday. Truly remarkable. Let's see what else. Some folks in here, Gary Held, Scotty Barnes, talking about the fact that Napier came from rural Georgia. Yeah, and that's what makes, I think, that comment so disappointing. It's a small thing, but that kind of stuff drives me insane. Like there's this prevailing opinion out there that some people don't have a right to an opinion because of where they come from. I think that's gross. And I think it's even worse coming from a guy like Napier because Napier is beloved in rural Georgia. When Billy got hired by Florida, I had a lot of Georgia fans who were like, BA, I love you and I love the Gator hater, but I'll never be able to say a bad word about Billy Napier because, I mean, his dad was a beloved coach in like Murray County, rural Georgia, Chatsworth, Georgia, like beloved figure. So if anybody ought to know that people in Central Florida don't deserve to be disregarded because of the fact they come from a rural place, if anybody ought to know that, it's Billy Napier. And frankly, I think he does probably know better than that. I just think in the moment, that's what he reached for and that's what he grabbed for. But it doesn't make it any less right. I mean, like I said before, like as a media person, I don't care that much about how the media gets treated. I really don't. Listen, I've got plenty to talk about no matter what. I really do. I really do. So you can limit me from going to practice. You can not take my questions. You can do whatever. For me personally, our audience is plenty big enough. Okay, like we don't I'm well taken care of. I don't get into any of that kind of stuff. But when you start picking on fans, I'm gonna have a problem with you, and that's just the way it is. Jonathan Moore, going back to Napier and how he's thought about up there in North Georgia, says, I live in Dalton. There's no love lost here. So perhaps not everybody in North Georgia feels that way, which is very funny. Gary Holt also says, I'm from LJ. My family been here hundreds of years, never lived anywhere else. 64, born and raised here. You love that. You love that. Tennille Calvino, thank you so much for the kind words. I appreciate you being here every day. Really do. Appreciate that for sure. Let's see what else. Winfred Steinspring asked about recruit reactions. I know Jeff Sentell had a really good one from Tyler Atkinson. We're going to hear that coming up from him. That was really strong. He gave it to us in the postgame show on Saturday. Apparently he was very impressed by what he saw. ABV Ball says most Furman fans have zero love for Billy Napier. Is that right? I didn't know that. Did not know that. Shaka Khan says, I think that Billy should stay on at Florida for 15 years to make good to the Florida fan base for the disrespect. There you go. He owes them another 15 years of coaching to try to win back their good graces. That's pretty funny. Frank Patterson says, I know you were sad to see loud and obnoxious Clemson and Florida State fans leaving the chat, but don't worry. The Miami fans are on deck. Oh, who's our guy that used to be in here all the time? And some of y'all don't remember him. This is going back years ago. You'll know Miami's arrived. Who's the dude from Miami that used to be in here all the time? What's his name? Do y'all remember him? There used to be a dude from Miami in here all the time, and once they went into the tank, he disappeared. I bet he's about to come back here. Green Soldier says, anytime a head coach attacks the fans, it's a sign of the beginning of the end. Dabo with Tyler from Spartanburg, Billy now. It is so true. It is so true. Like, if you're really comfortable in your own skin, you're not worried about what somebody else says. But the moment your sort of empire is about to topple, all of a sudden you're fighting with Tyler in Spartanburg. Green Soldier, first of all, it's great to see you here today. You are 1,000,000% right about that. DMart42 says Miami fans are the worst online. Can't imagine what that's like when they're good. Yeah, I mean, look, here's my issue with Miami fans, I would say writ large. It's that, look, compared to a Florida State fan, like Florida State fans are annoying, but there's no doubt they love their team. They may not tussle online when the team's playing badly, but they're not putting the garnet and gold in the trash heap, right? I mean, I'll at least give them that, is that Florida State fans are still Florida State fans, even though you're not really hearing from them. I would say that Clemson fans, I mean, I have enough respect for them to say, you're not going to hear damn word from a Clemson fan for a long time, but they're at least still fans. They're just sort of hiding out. Like, there's a bunch of these Miami fans that are like, if Miami's not good, they're just not fans. Like, there's nobody going to the games. There's no real, fan culture around Miami. It's like, Miami is good. All of a sudden they're showing up talking about Jim Kelly and Vinny Testaverde and Benny Blades and all those type of people. But the moment Miami loses 2 games again, when they're Dolphins fans or they're F1 fans or whatever it is that people down in South Florida do, that to me is what makes at times Miami fans so objectionable. Is the fact that if Miami's not winning, they're not even fans. Whereas at least like the Clemson, the Florida State fans probably keep some love for their team. Foster Moss says Billy isn't writing the fans another open letter. Yeah, there you go. Like, you can say what you want about Dan Mullen. Dan Mullen would have never done that. He wouldn't. He would have been smart enough not to do that. He would have been. Dan Mullen would not have called out the fans, not have challenged the fans. Mullen would have been smart enough to do that. So there you go. Billy Napier has now fallen below Dan Mullen. Okay, so what ABV Ball says is, I guess this is the FCS National Championship. Furman was up 1. Billy went for 2 with 8 seconds. He threw an interception, and App State won the game. Well, that sounds... One of the things I haven't probably paid enough attention to in my life is the FCS playoffs. That sounds like a lot of fun. FCS playoffs sound like a lot of fun. Spencer Clark says App State might whip Clemson. I'm telling you right now, I'd be really, really careful. And we did get this right on Florida State. We said Tech explodes Florida State. Florida State will play badly against Boston College. And that happened. I mean, I definitely have my eye on Clemson against App State on Saturday. I definitely do. Definitely do. Scott Pete said McElwain on his call-in show blasted a bull Gator. That's one of their big boosters. And then he was gone. Yeah, McElwain would do this. It's like Mullen's the classic example of he's dumb, but he's not stupid. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like that. Like, if there was ever a person that's the human embodiment of dumb but not stupid, that's Dan Mullen. Jim McElwain just was not. Like, I've had a couple of players at the time, former players now, tell me about some personal interactions they had with, like McElwain, just to be totally honest with you. And at the time, I thought this was hilarious because, just total phony, no ability to connect with recruits and kind of the private one-on-one meetings. Like, he just didn't have that human component. And, when the whole shark thing came up, which was not McElwain, and honestly, if I had something like that about me, I'd probably be kind of concerned about it too, because from his standpoint, he was getting made fun of something that he didn't do. Like, McElwain was not the guy with the shark. Come to find out, I think after all these years, we actually figured out who the shark guy was. I'm not going to say because I don't want to get it wrong, but I think we actually did learn who the shark guy was. But McElwain handled that so poorly. He was so like stiff about all that because he just didn't have any kind of like sort of human ability to connect and interact. So yeah, would he have called out his own fans? And is it surprising me to find out that he may have ripped somebody on a coach's show? Perhaps not. Randy Hall mentioning Mark Richt. Obviously, great to see Coach Richt on Saturday giving the invocation before the game. That was great to see. By the way, Randy also in his aviation world is going to be managing some travel for the Furman team here coming up. So there you go. Roger Hall mentioning growing up in Calhoun. By the way, we got a good one on Friday night up in rural Georgia if Billy Napier will allow us to be there. Up between Calhoun and Cartersville. Like, how much fun is that going to be? What a great matchup that is. But maybe that's just my rural roots shining through here. Savannah Bryan says, if Dabo thinks there's not a talent gap, that's even worse. That means that him and his staff are not competent to coach. Yeah, I mean, Brian, such a good point. We said this yesterday. If I was a fan of Clemson, the thing that would horrify me is the fact that Dabo Swinney doesn't know what he doesn't know. Like, I got to have you know this. I do. And listen, in my sort of job away from here at DawgNation Daily, I talk to a lot of high school coaches. What I can tell you is, like, every now and then I've heard this from a college coach, but I just probably talk to more high school coaches than college coaches. Once again, that's perhaps just sort of my rural roots showing up here. But a lot of coaches know that, yeah, we got a tough one coming up on Friday. Yeah, it's going to be hard. We're going to try to get out. We're trying to get through this one. We're going to try to get to the next one. Like, that just comes up in conversation sometimes. Like, every now and then, a coach is like, yeah, I don't like this matchup for our team because, oh, boy, have you seen them. And good coaches just sort of know. Like, I mean, you'd love to win every game, and, you know, maybe sometimes coaches do have a little bit of false confidence, but a good coach knows when things are about to go badly, and hopefully in our own lives. Like, if you're walking into a meeting that you're not prepared for, hopefully you know it. Like, if you've got a sales presentation and you're just not going to get the sale, hopefully you have some idea of the fact that, no, this is probably not set up to go well for me. Like, you know what I'm saying? Hopefully we all have a little bit of foreknowledge, you know, of what's about to happen for us at work maybe. I don't think Dabo has that. I don't think Dabo has that. And I don't dislike Dabo Swinney. I've told y'all before, I probably like Dabo a little more than some of y'all do. But you can't be this caught off guard. I mean, have you seen Georgia getting off the bus? Like, have you seen them? Have you seen them? Like, you can't be telling me, oh yeah, it's basically all the same. I mean, they got players, we got players. They blew us out. We've blown out people before 5 years ago. Like you can't be doing that. You can't be doing that. Scott P talking about me defending from people from Ocala. I said this the other day. The thing I'll never forgive Florida for is the fact that they've turned Dan Mullen to a sympathetic figure. You know, like the fact that Mullen seems actually a little bit better in our eyes because of how bad that Florida's been after him. The fact that Florida has got me now defending people from Ocala on this show, I'll never forgive him for that. I'll never forgive him for that. Kenneth Holt says a good coach always underestimates his players and overestimates the opponent. You at least plan for all those contingencies, right? I think that's absolutely true. Frank Patterson, calling him the booming onion, I think y'all came up with that nickname. It's fantastic because he crushed it a couple times on Saturday. Really did. Mike Brown says Dabo's too nice for his own good. Got to have a different mo with your players sometime. Yeah, I mean, Dabo's personality worked to the tune of 2 national championships. If he retired today, he's an all-time great. I mean, you have to say that, right? In a playoff era, to go 6 years in a row, even if it's the pillow soft ACC, still beat Alabama twice in a national championship game. Like, his resume is incorruptible. That is a sterling, unimpeachable resume, and I mean that. And you know, if you're a Georgia fan, hopefully you can openly acknowledge that too. Like, that is a legitimate coaching career. Even if he's a young enough guy, theoretically coach for a lot longer. But if he stopped coaching today, that is a legitimate coaching career. Moving forward, I don't see any success for him. So as long as he chooses to coaching this way, it's over. How come it used to work and now it doesn't? Maybe Brent Venables has something to do with that. I don't know. Obviously, Trevor Lawrence and Deshaun Watson have a lot to do with that. But the past, no defense needed. It is unimpeachable. The future, there is nothing of success on the forefront for them, I don't believe. All right, we have got to go. Woods of East Atlanta says, I don't think Western Kentucky tells us anything about Bama relative to Georgia. Yeah, I would say that's probably true. I mean, like, to me, the game on Saturday for Bama was that kind of classic game where, like, coaches love getting off to good starts. They just love getting off to good starts. And obviously they wanted a big show in front of the night game, Bryant-Denny Stadium. Of course, Bama wanted a big show there. Like, do I think that Georgia's going to beat Tennessee Tech on Saturday as bad as Bama beat Western Kentucky on Saturday? Not even close. Not even close. If my life depended on it, could I guarantee that Georgia scores 40 points on Saturday? Nope. I would not do it. I would not do it. I don't think Georgia cares. I just don't. Alabama on Saturday, this past weekend, I think they really, really cared. They wanted to give Kalen DeBoer a fun, fan-friendly welcome into the SEC. I think that's right. DT says, where's Dari taking me to lunch? Listen, when Dari and I go to lunch, I start to say it's me that takes him. He doesn't take me. But normally we'll get somebody around here to pay for it. So Dari and I just sort of show up and we let the corporate folks pay for it. That's kind of that's how that works. When you're Dari payroll, somebody else picks up the lunch tab. Okay, that's how that works because we love our R.S. Andrews cool down and things like that. All right, we're gonna go. Oh, Savannah Bryan also pointing out. Speaking of look aheads, how about next weekend, Florida State against Memphis? Be really careful. Motivation game for the Tigers there too. Norvell, their former coach. Be really careful there. Really careful. 0-3 is not impossible. All right, we have got to go. I am so late. Y'all, speaking of Dari, check out R.S. Andrews online, rsandrews.com for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the prices promised. You can trust them on all of that. They'll keep you cool and comfortable all summer long. You can find them online, rsandrews.com. See you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily presented by ServPro. We'll look forward to talking to you then.